We are in the midst of an ongoing housing crisis that is so brutal that Americans need to be making six figures just to afford a median priced home in the United States, which is why the US government should stop private equity firms from buying up entire neighborhoods of residential homes. They should ban foreign investors from buying up residential properties to launder their money in. And they should, aggressively push to build more housing. If the federal government has the ability to basically snatch up land that belongs to people and do whatever they want with it, how the hell are we still dealing with a housing crisis due to a limited supply of homes? Now, I tell you all that, that's a big preface to get into the details of the latest report showing just how much money Americans need to make to afford a house. So this new report determines that you have to make over $100,000 a year to afford a median priced home in America. Obviously, the situation is much worse in some of these big cities where the available inventory of homes is much lower. So how did we get to this situation? How did it get so bad? Well, there are two separate problems today, which include incredibly high mortgage rates. Obviously, that makes borrowing to buy a home much more expensive. And then there's also the low inventory of homes. So mortgage rates are at their highest level in 2 decades because the Federal Reserve has decided to tamp down inflation by increasing interest rates. So that has an impact on the interest rates that mortgage lenders implement in the mortgages that they sign off on. And so usually higher interest rates, and I was waiting for this, I was hoping this would happen, but I was so naive. Usually higher interest rates will lower the price of homes because it becomes more expensive to buy homes. However, there's something happening this time around. Mortgage rates are high. Americans who already own homes are unwilling to sell their homes. Because if they were to sell their homes and look to buy another home, what do you think is gonna happen? They're gonna have to take out another mortgage at a much higher interest rate. So everyone is staying put. No one's moving out, no one's selling their homes. And that is at a time when the housing market was already dealing with incredibly low inventory of available homes for Americans to purchase. Greg McBride, Bankrate chief financial analyst, told NBC News that as rates go up, people who bought their homes years ago and locked in mortgages at 3 or 4% interest rates become less and less likely to move. And honestly, I don't blame them. I mean, it is outrageously expensive to take out a mortgage right now. So inventory, which it was already low, is now even more limited, and that's why prices are shooting up through the roof. Those high prices would normally incentivize homeowners to sell, but again, no one wants to sell and then be caught in a situation where they're looking for a place to live. They might need to take out another mortgage and then they have to deal with higher interest rates. Now, the outcome of this catch-22 is an awful housing market for just about everyone. A home buyer must earn $114,627 to afford the median priced US home, and that's up 15% from just a year ago and up more than 50% since the start of the pandemic. That's the highest annual income necessary to afford a home on record. I mean, something's gotta give. It really does. The situation is untenable. The notion that the American dream is alive and well is laughable to say the least when people are working great jobs, they're making good money, and they are still unable to afford a home, which by the way is still the only avenue in which most working Americans can build wealth in this country. Now, the average existing home sale exceeds $310,000 according to the Case-Shiller US National Home Price Index, nearly double the cost just a decade ago. Year to date, home prices are up more than 5%. I just wanna share a personal anecdote with you all. So I grew up in Reseda, California, an overwhelmingly working class neighborhood, overwhelmingly Latino neighborhood. I have fond memories of growing up there. But I also remember growing up and thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm gonna work really hard so one day I can afford a home, a place to live, in a nicer neighborhood, okay? You wanna know how much homes cost in Reseda, California right now? $800,000 is the cheapest home that I've seen on the market in Reseda, California. My parents bought their home for a little over $100,000 back in the late 1980s, 1988 if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, moving on, here's the issue. Most Americans don't make $114,000 a year. The typical American household earns about $40,000 less than the income needed to buy a median priced home. The median household income was roughly $75,000 in 2022, the most recent year for which annual income data is available. And hourly wages luckily have risen in 2023, but not nearly as fast as the income necessary to afford a home is rising. So the average US hourly wage has increased by about 5% over the last year. So we have an obvious problem here, and we need to increase the inventory of homes. If we don't, what's likely gonna happen is the rich will keep getting richer because they will have the means to purchase these homes, oftentimes in cash, or they'll have the means to, help out their children when they're ready to buy homes. And everyone else just falls behind and has essentially almost no avenue to build wealth or have a stable housing situation. So there are some examples, by the way, according to a Redfin survey indicating that this trend is ongoing. So an eye-popping 38% of recent home buyers under the age of 30 used either a cash gift from a family member or an inheritance in order to afford their down payment. And in the Redfin survey, which asked how recent home buyers accumulated the money for their down payment, 509 respondents were under the age of 30. Among those young home buyers, 23% used a cash gift from a family member, and 21% used inheritance money for their down payment. So that means Americans who are not from well-off, well-to-do families are just not going to, in most cases, be able to buy a home. And again, this is a man-made problem because of the lack of housing, because of the fact that we're not building, because of the fact that we keep pointing to the NIMBYs as the excuse for why various municipalities, like Los Angeles, by the way, failed to build housing. But what's really interesting about that argument is I keep seeing buildings with luxury apartments getting built all across the city. I know that this is happening in other big cities as well. So the idea that construction isn't happening is laughable to me because we all see the construction happening with our very eyes. The question is, why are we building unaffordable housing that sits empty when we need to increase the stock of affordable housing? Little strange, right? And as people get pushed out of the housing market, unable to buy a home, what happens? They look for a place to rent, increasing the number of people in the rental market, which drives the price of rent up. It is a disaster for everyone. And the fact that there's really no discussion about alleviating the pain that hardworking Americans are feeling right now is incredibly frustrating. But don't worry, we've got hundreds of billions of dollars to funnel to various war efforts across the globe. We totally have the resources for that. As Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, unequivocally said just this week, of course we have the resources to fund Israel's war in Gaza and Ukraine's war against Russia. Now, look, I don't begrudge wanting to help the Ukrainian people. I do have a problem with funneling money to the Israeli government with no strings attached as Palestinian civilians are being murdered and brutalized in the Gaza Strip. But if we've got endless resources for war efforts, how about we build affordable housing for the American people? Just a crazy novel idea, I know.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.